Like a goat between two lions, wrote the king who built modern Afghanistan of his nation. A grain of wheat between the two strong millstones of a grinding wheel. Furious rebellions had raged across Amir Abdur Rahman Khan's kingdom, 17 in his 15-year reign, led by clerics and tribal elites enraged by the ending of their privileges. From their nests across the borders, Imperial Britain and Russia watched. Like hungry vultures, he wrote, anxious to swallow their weak victim. I had to put in order all those hundreds of petty chiefs, plunderers, robbers and cutthroats who were the cause of everlasting trouble in Afghanistan. Thousands were executed, tens of thousands displaced in a campaign to transform the demographics of his restive provinces. Well, that everlasting trouble continues. Last summer, when the United States pulled out of Afghanistan, some experts had hoped that the Taliban, just like Amir Abdur Rahman, would succeed in enforcing order, even at the cost of democratic rights. Instead, an imploded nation-state is emerging, where drugs, illegal mining, extortion and war-making form the pillars of the social order. For weeks now, there's been mounting evidence of what an entropic Afghanistan could mean for the whole region and our world. Terrorists of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan have staged multiple cross-border attacks in a campaign aimed at carving out a mini-state in Pakistan's northwest. Arms left behind by withdrawing Western forces are being supplied to jihadist groups across the region. Even as ordinary Afghans are reported to be selling their organs and their children for food, the Afghan opium industry, which already supplies 80% of global demand for drugs, is blossoming. Earlier this month, the United States government invoked emergency powers to seize some $7 billion held by Afghanistan's central bank in New York. About half that money will be used to meet compensation claims by one group of 9/11 victims against the Taliban. The Taliban compensation judgment, very controversial in international law and rejected by courts in Europe, was delivered months before the Taliban took power in Afghanistan and had no claim on the New York assets held by the country's central bank. But the Americans have taken it anyway. The remaining $3.5 billion will be used for emergency aid in a country where millions are starving. Like the European Union and India, which is scheduled to begin shipping wheat to Afghanistan next week through Pakistan, most countries agree humanitarian aid is critical. The bigger message, though, is clear. There will be no investment in trade and infrastructure until the Taliban deliver on counterterrorism. Sounds like a good thing? Well, it might not be bad news for the Taliban, and this is why. For 2 years after beginning its 9/11 war in Afghanistan, the United States had resisted funding nation building. As the first sparks of the Taliban insurgency became evident, though, troops were pumped in along with civilian investments. The early results seemed fantastic. The economy grew by about 10% every year from 2003 to 2012. There were new roads, new phone networks, new businesses everywhere. Then the dream soured. The tidal wave of cash that had washed over the country's economy far exceeded what it could absorb. Large-scale corruption gutted institutions and created feuds over who got the money. The political system rapidly criminalized. Afghanistan's national security advisor, Rangin Spanta, famously said, "Corruption is not just a problem of the system of governance in Afghanistan, it is the system of governance." In 2012, President Barack Obama's administration ended a brief surge in troop numbers, having concluded that sending in more soldiers wasn't ending the insurgency. As the soldiers left, both military and civilian spending started to decline. And as the funding dried up, so did the Afghan government's ability to buy loyalty from local warlords, eventually leading it to the collapse we saw. Like the United States after 9/11, Amir Abdur Rahman wanted to end warlordism and build a modern state. For generations, the Amir wrote, Afghan rulers had bought peace by paying subsidies to clerics, chieftains and warlords. It induced the people to live a lazy life, he testily noted, and get government money for doing nothing, rewarding them for being helpless creatures of no use to their country or to themselves. The emir's efforts to change the system, though, provoked insurgencies. A 50,000 army had to be raised to fight those insurgencies, and chains of fortresses built. Thousands were massacred, and entire populations shifted. The emir wanted a nation. He ended up with a coercion machine instead. Ever since the 1980s, Islamist Mujahideen groups had begun to build a different kind of state, an empire of poppies. Gretchen Peters has described how Jihad commander Mullah Muhammad Naseem Akhundzada set production quotas, implemented a predatory loan service to small farmers, even threatened small farmers who failed to plant poppy with castration or death. The long war in Afghanistan, you see, had created an ecology that suited opium farming. The ancient Karez irrigation system, hand-dug tunnels that tapped groundwater, had been bombed out, and the social cohesion needed to maintain it had disintegrated. Poppies were a hardy crop that needed little water. Pakistan's ISI used to bring in weapons, medicine and food and carried back opium. The opium was shipped to Europe and the United States through Karachi's crime cartels who laundered money through property and the stock exchange. The Taliban leaders who took power in 1997 cashed in. In 1996, the year before the Taliban took power, Afghanistan had produced 2,250 metric tons of opium. That number soared in 1999 to double 4,580 metric tons. From 2006, as the Taliban re-emerged from their sanctuaries in Pakistan, narcotics became an increasingly significant source of revenue. To this, the Taliban added taxes on illegal semi-precious stone mines, truck traffic and businesses. In spite of international sanctions, the Taliban thrived. To protect his empire from the influence of predatory powers, Amir Abdur Rahman invested in building a military, but not infrastructure, education, communication or transport. The great Timurid trading cities of Herat and Balkh had populations which, anthropologist Thomas Barfield has noted, late 19th century Kabul, with a population of only 50,000, never came close to achieving. For the Taliban, this backwardness was an example to be emulated. In 2002, the World Bank noted that the Emirates' economy is in a state of collapse, its infrastructure destroyed, its formal state institutions severely undermined or non-existent, and its social indicators the worst in the world. The Taliban's opium trade, though, ensured the survival of the bare bones of its power, its coercive resources. Economic historian Tirthankar Roy's work helps understand why nation building has proved hard in Afghanistan. You see, the resource-poor country was never integrated into the maritime trading system that powered the Industrial Revolution. Imperial powers balked at the cost of expanding into the country, which means authority was never centralized, as it was in other resource-poor regions of Asia, like India. Lacking revenue, Roy observed, governments running the country from Kabul could never impose their writ over the entire country. The Taliban's narco-state bypassed this problem by delegating power to warlords and criminals in return for adherence to its ideology. This, it seems set to doing again, defying predictions that in Afghanistan, which had benefited from modernization, would resist the imposition of a second emirate. Few nation states seem willing to give the failed 9/11 nation-building experiment another chance. Even China, scholar Yun Sun has observed, shows no urge to play messiah in Afghanistan. Large investments like the Mes Aina copper mines are contingent on a long period of stability. There is no confidence anywhere that the Taliban will provide it. Even though international leaders understand what the Taliban's dystopic state might mean, think unchecked narcotics, trafficking, refugee flows, safe havens for terrorists, even the next 9/11. No one's willing to pay the price to prevent it. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm National Security Editor with ThePrint.